The bull market is back, and I'm on the hunt for the best crypto sector. If you've been around the crypto space for as long as I have, you'll know that a bad project in a hot sector does way better than a good project in a poor sector. So to maximize our profits, I'm gonna analyze all the sectors out there to find the best one. And today, we'll start with the biggest sector of them all, Layer 1 blockchains. I'll share the pros and cons for the sector, I'll rank it against all the other sectors, and I'll share with you some coins or tokens that you could potentially buy. So without further ado, let's get started with the pros, aka the case for Layer 1 projects. The first pro is that the market has spoken. Layer 1 blockchains are the biggest sector of them all. If you scroll through the top 100 of CoinMarketCap, you'll see that it's dominated by Layer 1 blockchains. In fact, the total market cap of all Layer 1s represents a whopping 68% of the entire crypto market. So what this tells us is that investors are assigning higher valuations to these protocols, and they have more confidence in them as well. But that really shouldn't surprise you though, right? Layer 1s have always outperformed in every cycle. Last cycle, it was Solana pulling a 500x. And the cycle before, it was projects like Neo pulling a 2000x. So this sector's performance speaks for itself, and I expect it to continue in future cycles. Now, my next pro is that Layer 1 blockchains have the most money as a sector. And a big reason why is because VCs love to invest in this sector. When I was fundraising for one of my crypto startups in the past, one thing I always heard from them was, quote, "We're only interested in infrastructure projects." So that means they only want to invest in the underlying protocols, like Layer 1 blockchains, rather than the apps built on top. But it isn't only the VCs who think like this. The institutions do too, which is why most of the crypto ETFs or trusts out there are for Layer 1 blockchains. And this is super bullish for the sector, by the way, because those investment products could bring in a huge wave of demand if the institutions buy them. Anyways, it should be no surprise that most projects in the sector have been able to raise a freak ton of money. Aptos, one of the Solana killers, raised $350 million without even a live product. And then Sui, another Solana killer, raised over $300 million around the same time. So they all have substantial war chests or treasuries, which of course helps them to dominate, because they can spend that money on growth, or they can just enjoy a super long runway without ever having to worry about running out of money. Now, another advantage of having all that money is they can use it to get some big name partnerships. And that's actually my next pro for this sector. Layer 1 blockchains have been landing some massive partnerships lately, such as Visa, Reddit, Starbucks, and more. Visa chose Solana for their stablecoin settlement services, and Starbucks chose Polygon to host their digital rewards program. Those are just two examples, but I'm so bullish on these partnerships because they can help drive mass adoption for these Layer 1 blockchains. Think about it, these iconic companies have millions of customers, right? So they can introduce blockchain tech to them in a tasteful manner. Another benefit of these partnerships is that they can increase the public's confidence in these projects and could even influence regulatory discussions as well. Imagine that you're some old politician who has no idea what crypto is. Wouldn't you have a better perception of it if you saw that Coca-Cola or Amazon was working with some crypto company? I sure as hell would. So yeah, my takeaway is that all these big name partnerships that Layer 1 projects have been able to get can only benefit them as a sector. Anyways, my next pro has quite the funny name. It's called the Fat Protocol Thesis. It argues that most of the value will be captured by the underlying blockchains rather than the apps built on top. It's really quite the interesting thesis, because in the Web 2 world, all the value is captured by the companies on top, like Google or Amazon, instead of the underlying protocols like HTTP and TCP/IP. But this thesis claims that things are different for blockchains for three key reasons. First, these blockchains act as a shared data layer for the apps built on top. So the apps themselves don't have any advantage over each other, right? Because they all have equal access to the same base layer data. But the underlying blockchain does have an advantage, because it's where all the data is posted, stored, and accessed. Second, these blockchains have native tokens, which can help kickstart a growth loop. Initially, people want these Layer 1 tokens for speculation, right? But then that increases the activity in their ecosystem, which attracts more developers and users, which leads to more activity, and on it goes. So the initial speculation actually kickstarts a positive growth loop, and this phenomenon is unique to the blockchain space. Anyways, the third reason is that these blockchains all have proven value capture mechanism. Most of them capture value through transaction fees or staking. And those are very clear-cut and proven value capture mechanisms, as opposed to some apps that don't really need a token, but force it into their system to justify their token sales. So overall, this fat protocol thesis is quite complicated, but after taking the time to understand it, I do think it makes logical sense that layer 1s will capture most of the value. Anyways, while that was quite the complicated point, my next point is dead simple. It's the fact that layer 1s have already achieved strong product market fit, regardless of which apps emerge on top. Critics say that there's no killer app for crypto yet. But what if Blockspace was the killer app? We've seen waves of innovation come and go, from DeFi to NFTs to GameFi. But the constant through all of that are the layer 1 blockchains upon which they're built. So clearly these layer 1s are the most important part of the stack. And perhaps it doesn't matter which killer app eventually emerges, as we know that the blockchain upon which it's built will benefit regardless. Ew, that was a lot of pros, wasn't it? But now it's time for the cons. Actually, before we get there, I want to show you this. This is a hardware wallet, believe it or not, and it's made by Tangem, who's also the sponsor of this video. So a bunch of y'all who watched my previous Tangem video already bought their wallet. But this is actually their brand new wallet that just launched. And let me just say, it's even better than before. There's a brand new design, brand new app, and a way to export your private key as a seed phrase that wasn't there before. But besides all that, it's the same old easy to use hardware wallet that's just a card with a microchip plus an app on your phone. It doesn't require any fancy device, cables, or a computer to use. You literally just tap your card on your phone to sign transactions. Now, in terms of security, it's ultra secure. Their chip has the same certification level as electronic passports, and it generates your private key in a way that never gets exposed. So yeah, they support over 1,000 coins and tokens in their wallet, so if you want one, you can get it for 10% off by using my code COINSIDER. Now, back to the cons, or the case against the layer 1 sector. And my first point is that so many of these projects launch with a sky-high market cap these days, so there's very little upside left for us retail investors. Just look at Celestia, which opened at a $300 million market cap, or Aptos that opened at a $1 billion market cap. Do those still have 100x potential? Honestly, I doubt it. All the upside was taken by the insiders who got in at low prices. And guess what? That means they own a large percentage of the tokens and can dump on us at any time. That's why when I look at the current state of the layer 1 sector, it does look more like a mature sector with less upside compared to the smaller up-and-coming sectors out there. Now, my next con is that there's just way too much competition in this sector. People all saw the strengths and advantages of layer 1 blockchains, so they're like, well, why don't we just build our own? Because they're so great. But that means that this sector is way too saturated now, and all the resources are fragmented as a result. I'm talking about limited developers, limited users, and limited capital, all of which these layer 1s need. But it's not only that. There's so many options out there that block space has become a freaking commodity. Just look at Aptos. Their blockchain is supposed to be super scalable and amazing in terms of its capabilities. But if you look at their usage stats, it's like a ghost town, which is quite sad to see for a blockchain worth several $billion. Also, unfortunately, this problem of block space overabundance doesn't look like it'll improve anytime soon, as the rise of layer 2s only makes it worse. Anyways, my next con is that most of the projects in this sector are plagued with unsustainable economics. When I talk about economics for blockchains, what I really mean is the revenue they generate from fees and the cost to operate their network, aka what they pay their validators or miners. To be sustainable, you need the revenue to be greater than or equal to the cost of operating the network. But the problem is that most of these L1s are not generating enough fees. Just look at Solana. It only generates 5 figures worth of fees per day. But that's not enough to pay all their network validators, so they have to inflate their supply in order to compensate. Now, you may be thinking, well, doesn't this affect most projects in other sectors? Great question, but the answer is no, not necessarily. In the DeFi derivatives niche, a lot of projects are actually generating a crap ton of revenue, like GMX, for example. They're able to economically sustain their protocol and offer real yield for sharing a cut of the revenue, rather than the fake yield that a lot of these layer 1 projects offer through token inflation. Anyways, remember how I said in my pros section that layer 1s are among the biggest projects out there? Well, once again, that's a double-edged sword, because my next con is that many of these L1s are in the regulators' crosshairs. We know that regulators like the SEC are out to get crypto, but they're also understaffed, so they can't go after every random project out there. But for the bigger projects, they can. And that's why a lot of them were named in the SEC's recent lawsuits, such as Sol, ADA, and Algo. Now, I'm not saying that I agree with the SEC's points there, but the fact remains that investors may be hesitant to hold those tokens, or exchanges may be hesitant to list them. And that leads to less liquidity, accessibility, and demand. Now, this regulation point actually leads me to my next con, which has to do with TradFi's willingness, or lack thereof, to use these public blockchains. If you haven't noticed already, TradFi institutions really care about maintaining compliance and minimizing risks. So when they weigh their options, they see that permission chains often fit their requirements better than the public chains. That's why JP Morgan has their own permission chain for their JP Morgan coin. It's also why when BlackRock gushes about tokenization, they could very well mean tokenization on a permission platform rather than on public ones. Just think about it. If you hold a token that represents your car title and then some hacker steals it from you, does that mean that they now own your car? Hell no, that's not how it works in the real world. So any system that works with real world assets will have to do stuff like reverse transactions and things like that. So that's why it's a real question as to whether TradFi will even embrace these layer 1 blockchains, or if they'll build a separate system altogether. Anyways, those were a lot of pros and cons to digest, but now it's time for the fun part. The ranking of this sector against all others. Now, since this is the first video of the series, there's nothing to compare to yet, so layer 1 sits alone at number 1. But in the next video, we'll see if that sector can beat layer 1s in the rankings, so be sure to subscribe to catch that. Also, don't forget to use my link below to get the brand new Tangem Wallet.